So let's talk about points of information, or POIs. Basically, the speaker who is talking has the right to accept or not accept the point of information. So you, as the person asking, have to say something like, point of information, or if you're really debating traditionally, you would stand up, put your hand on your head to keep your wig on, and you would hold out your hand to show that you don't have a sword in it and that you don't mean harm, and then they would recognize you, and you would get to ask your point of information or make a short point and then sit down. Now, you need to keep this very brief. If you don't, they're not going to take any more points of information. It's going to look bad to the judge, etc. And in some leagues, like STOA, you only have a certain number of seconds in which to even state the point to begin with. So the rule to keep in mind is that you want more points of information to be asked, not fewer. So everybody just needs to be polite about it. So here's what a point of information is. It's usually either a clarification or some type of leading question, or occasionally it's a clever point. But you really want to avoid giving away your best arguments, and I think that's the key strategy. Don't stand up and think, oh, I can refute the point they're making, refute it like in 10 seconds, like maybe tell how their example doesn't work, or who knows. And then the other team goes ahead and refutes you. Or ask them a crucial detail that they forgot, and then they fill in the crucial detail. Giving away your best arguments is a great way to have them refuted before you've even made them. So I would recommend to you that you want to ask leading types of questions. Just like in cross-examination, gather some information, but don't let them know where you're going with it. So the point of information in terms of order in the round can only be asked during the constructive speeches. That's the first 4 speeches. Cannot be asked in the rebuttals. It can also not be asked in the first or the last minutes of this constructive speech. That's referred to as protected time. Generally, your judge is going to rap on the table like this when you have exited or when you are re-entering protected time. But if they forget, all you have to say is, I'm in protected time, or you're out of order, or something like that. The other way to take or not take questions are some phrases like this. Not at this time, or at the end of this point, or not anymore for this speech, or you can say, I'll take your point, or go ahead, I recognize you. Something like that. What you don't want to do, though, is ignore them for 30 seconds while they are standing there having said point of information. I may have left out that some people don't say point of information. They might just raise their hand or stand up. You can do any of that. I recommend saying point of information because I found that when you vocalize your request, you're more likely to have it answered. You really want to be careful of the timing, though, of your points of information if you want them answered. The best place to ask a point of information is when they're finishing up a sentence, and it's a natural pause for you to stand up and say, point of information. Then they're more likely to stop and say, I'll take your point. But if they're talking fast or in the middle of an argument, and you just say, point of information, and they're still talking, it's not really an opportune moment to ask the point of information, so just save it until a natural time when they're more likely to take your point. I'm just going to stop it right there. Now let's look at some of the basic rules and procedures surrounding a parliamentary debate round. Here are the 2 most important things to remember. First of all, no quoting evidence is allowed. This doesn't mean you can't say, James Madison once said. It doesn't mean that you can't say, well, Dr. So-and-so pointed out, or in a New York Times article last week they said. It means that this type of debate is not about researching, cutting cards, and coming up there and reading evidence to prove your point. It's supposed to be about general knowledge that anybody ought to know. So people always ask, well, how do you know if the other team's not lying? If the judge thinks they're lying, then they don't believe them. If you think they're making it up, then you say, I don't actually think that that's how it is, and since no evidence is really allowed, then that has to be thrown out. That's general, but you'll find that when you actually get to a debate tournament, this works much simpler. So in theory, yes, asking that question, it sounds mind-boggling. How does this actually play out? But when you actually get there and you see, oh, people are referring to this event in history, or they're saying about, Obama had this provision in his healthcare law. If it sounds reasonable, generally the round goes with it. If it doesn't, generally it's not accepted as proof. So you want to focus on knowing general facts. You want to be up on current events. You can have old debate cases, you can have articles saved on your computer, you can have things printed out like an extemp box, and you can consult those resources, but in the debate round itself, the only thing you're allowed to bring in is what you wrote in the 15 minutes of prep time beforehand. Not what anybody else wrote for you, but what you and your partner wrote in that time, and you're not really allowed to quote evidence. So, with that in mind, prep time is a 15-minute ordeal of quick thinking and trying to scrap together several good arguments so that you can go in that debate round and sound good. In some debate formats like British Parli, you're only allowed to consult your partner. Some other formats, send you both into a room and the judge announces the resolution in there. In NPDA, and as STOA is testing right now with their pilot project, the resolution is announced to a general assembly, and you can talk to whoever you want. You can go online if there's internet there. If they ban the internet, then you can. If you want to call your friend, fine. I used to call my dad about foreign policy resolutions because he's a master's in strategic intelligence and knows all kinds of things about things going on around the world, and that helped us at several parliamentary tournaments. Sometimes I would have an old debate case on the subject and would be able to consult that, and sometimes you just knew. The best advice I have for you is, if you can, set up some good Google alerts, keep up on the Wall Street Journal and The Economist, and you'll be pretty fine going into debate rounds about current world events. That's not always going to be the case, though, because as we'll see, there are some resolutions that are metaphors, some that are value debates, and those aren't really going to relate to recent events. So you've got to be up on things, but really at a more general level than you're used to. In policy debate, we've often described it this way to people who come to college having done high school debate on a resolution. They have knowledge like this. Let's just say this is knowing nothing, zero knowledge. They have knowledge like this until you get to Russia. Boom. They have a ton of knowledge about Russia. And then, not that much general knowledge. As you become more educated, college debates tend to be more at this level, where everybody kind of has some general knowledge, and then if you have a topic for the whole year, they research a little bit, but they're busy with school and stuff, and so they don't obsess over it. Parli debate is just, a lot of people have some pretty good general knowledge, and that's the realm that you want to be in, is general knowledge and general ability to argue about general things that happen in the world and world events, and predict the future. No, I'm just kidding. Talk about sci-fi, no. Time travel, well, I've used it. Back to prep time and rules. The key rules that I think you should also bear in mind are that I don't even have any more. That's it. So I'll just have to I'm going to have to edit this, so I'll just cut some of that. So now let's talk about some of the basic strategies, and we'll talk about the different types of resolution. The first strategy that I think is a lifesaver is when you hear that resolution announced, don't succumb to the temptation to just start talking about it. When everybody starts buzzing for a while about the resolution, you end up getting locked into one or two ideas, when the resolution might be much broader than that. So we instituted a rule on the PhD debate team where nobody is allowed to talk for a whole minute after the resolution is announced, which may not sound like long to you, but when you've only got 15 minutes to prep, trust me, it's a lot of time. But the key is, after that, you and your partner can talk to each other, and you both had completely different takes on the resolution. So one might have thought of these three cases, the other might have thought of those three cases, and you're going to end up having a better prep time against a wider variety of arguments than you would have if everybody who just heard the resolution and went with their first idea that came to them. So don't be too fast to launch onto an idea. The second part of the strategy, though, is lock into an idea if you're government before 5 minutes are up. Just like in an extemp room or when you're preparing for impromptu, you don't want to change your topics halfway through your prep time. If you haven't selected a case by 5 minutes in, the results are going to be devastating because it is very difficult to really come up with the full body of a case in just the 10 minutes you might have left after you've switched ideas completely, because you have to redefine things, you have to come up with a resolution again, and you and your partner have to write out contentions. You're going to find out that one partner's writing and the other partner's writing, and they're not even going to look at what each other prepared. You're just going to have to toss it to him and hope he can read it. So make sure that you've selected your arguments on the government side by 5 minutes in, and are just going with it. Some more strategies for prepping. Basically, my partner and I would always talk to each other a little bit about which way we're going. And once we had settled on a direction, we would, this is all on the government side, divvy up the case. So one person would write more definitions and interpretation and the criterion, and then the other person would write the harms, claim, and advantages, or the contentions, or whatever it was like that. That's one way to do it. The other way we would sometimes do it is if we're prepping in a group, we would, having selected the case, have all the prime ministers prep together, and the members of government would prep near them where they could kind of hear the case as it developed, but they'd go ahead and prep two-way responses. So they would prep responses to common disadvantages that they expected, or they would prep responses to topicality presses that they probably were going to get. And then you would end up going into the round ready for refutation. Really, I recommend that second approach when you have selected a case early on and are prepping in a good group. If it's just you and your partner, like you guys have your own idea, and that's what you want to prep, I would say prep the case together and consult with each other for most of the prep time. And only in the past couple minutes do you want to split up, and the Prime Minister will review the case, fit in more examples everywhere, make sure he can understand, and the other partner will think up more examples and maybe prepare some refutation for topicality that they might use in the second speech. So that's the basic strategy on the government side of prep time. On the opposition side of prep time, you have no idea what's coming to you, but I tell you that opposition is the easiest side to win. And for example, my partner and I at MPDA Nationals, our final year of college, won every single opposition round. So we had a 4-0 record for opposition, even on metaphorical resolutions. It's just easier to pick apart cases that were developed in only 15 minutes. Just like you can go into a policy debate round about Russia that you've studied for a whole year, hear a brand new case and pick it apart, Parli's like that too, except they didn't have the whole year to prepare. So I say opposition's easier, even though it seems more daunting. What you want to do is you want to analyze that resolution, and in your first little bit of prep time, come up with some possible approaches that the other team might use, but then think more generally. As many disadvantages and topicality arguments as you can make that link directly to the resolution, the better. So if the resolution says, like our example, stop ignoring the elephant in the room, you might have a disadvantage about stopping ignoring something that you've ignored for a long time, that has grown and bloated to the size of an elephant. Like just in theory, you can prep against the words of the resolution. Then you want to prep against some of the ideas of the resolution. Now, some are going to be really specific, like this House would repeal Obamacare. Then you can have some specific tailored arguments with facts, ready to go directly at that. But when it's more vague, just prep generally against the resolution. You also want to prep topicality arguments when you're opposition. Nothing, too fancy, just this is one interpretation, here's another interpretation, and here's another interpretation of the key words that make sure the round is narrowed enough so that your disadvantages and prep time on other arguments is not a waste. So those types of arguments, as you'll see in some of our example rounds, come in very key when someone has taken a squirrely interpretation of the resolution. All that put together, I have a final point about preparation. Parli debate is not my favorite form of debate, even though I think it's the most fun. It's fun for the debaters, but it's not so much fun for the audience. Because most Parli debaters tend to think, ooh, I get a chance to be clever and define the resolution however I want, and define the other team out of the round. Then you end up, instead of a debate, you have a complaining match. In British Parli, they do a better job of this because one of the major criteria for winning is having prepared a case that dead-on smacks the resolution out of the park and creates great clash for the rest of the round. That's part of the decision framework. I say my best advice to you is prepare on the resolution directly, and you will set up a more enjoyable debate round and make Parli be something that is more than just, a clever game, but is actually an important discussion about important events that everybody enjoys, not just the debaters.